Hello again, everybody. This is Charlie's Unimog Workshop. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about dovetails. And just to preface this, I'm a hobby woodworker. I don't do this for a living. I do woodworking as a hobby. And I have lots of hobbies. So I try not to spend a lot of money on any one hobby. I spend enough to get by, and I accept the fact that I'm going to have to spend more time with less sophisticated or less accurate equipment. So in this case, we're going to be making dovetails. These are called half-blind dovetails, and this is for the drawers in the kitchen of this. And you can see what we're making here is a dovetail joint. These are nice and tight, how I'd like them. There's plenty of room for glue in here when I glue these, just by nature of the way these work. And I've tried to make these with the front and back, just a little bit proud. These are the actual width of the drawer that I want, and I don't want the sides to be wider than that. So if there's any irregularities or bow or anything in this side piece, I want these to be just a little bit inside, not a lot. I can just feel that this drawer end is just a little bit proud of the surface of the side. So I'm doing this with an old Craftsman router set up with a 14-degree dovetail bit and a 7/16 guide bushing. And that is what's recommended for this Harbor Freight dovetail fixture, which I've had for about 20 years. I only used it once about 20 years ago on another project, so I had to sort of relearn all the tricks. And I've got a few tricks and tips that I learned this time around that I'll share with you. But first, we're going to go over to the whiteboard and I'll show you what's involved in the setup, what we have to do, and the sequence and the purpose for the sequence, because that's kind of important to get that right in setting up this fixture. It's a pretty wiggly fixture, so there's a lot of things you got to watch out for, and I'll talk through those as we set it up. Okay, here goes. Okay, here's the sketch of the dovetail fixture. This is a top view. If you turn around and look at it from that direction, this is the front view. And then if you look at it actually from this side, that's a side view that we'll use to set the backstop. But there's a sequence that you need to follow in order to be able to get to the next step successfully and be able to get through this without having to step back and go through, multiple setups of the same feature. So first off, you need to set the wood clamp. So there's a clamp for the front, the side pieces that actually is on the front of the fixture, and the front and back fit on the top of the fixture, and I'll show you how that works. But mostly there's two knobs that we use to set the clamping pressure on the wood so that you can get pieces of wood in and out. There's a little cam lock to secure the wood so that you only have to set it up once, and then you can run through all your parts. So first, set up the wood clamps, and it's really important to do this with stock. Even if it's scrap wood, it needs to be stock from what you intend to make the drawers out of, because the thickness really matters. The thickness and the width. So in my case, the thicknesses are different. I have a 3/4 inch front and back and 1/2 inch on both sides. So that matters. And you also need to have, because there's two locks, one for each side and each back. And it's important that you have a piece under each cam so that it all clamps evenly. Even if you're going to do one at a time, which you can do, you still need to set up the other wood clamp so that it clamps evenly and everything is straight. So after you get the wood clamp set, then you set the wood fences. So there's a fence for the front and back, and those are again on the top side, they're out over here, that set the position of the wood in the top of the fixture. I'll show you how that works. And there's another set on the front that sets the position of the sides in the front of the fixture. And I have a trick for setting that up, and I'll show you that when we get back over to the fixture. So we set the wood fences, and part of that setting is making sure that you have teeth and pockets in the position that you want to be in the drawer fronts. And what you don't want to have is a bunch of half teeth and half pockets. In my case, you'll see I have to have a half tooth, and so I'm putting that at the bottom of the drawer where it's not visible and you can't see it. So from the sides, it'll look like there'll be full teeth from the top of the drawer all the way down, and the very bottom there's a half tooth. I'll show you that. So we set the wood fences. Then you set this comb plate, which has the fingers, the aluminum fingers that you guide around. You're going to set that from the end of the sideboard. The document recommends 5-30 seconds, the instructions with that fixture. I tried that, it works well enough. It leaves enough room that you cut the whole, you want to make sure you have a full radius out here. And that'll help when you go to assemble this so that this full radius is packed up into the pocket. So combs stick out. And that I've set it 5-30 seconds. I actually went back and measured it. I'm a little bit short. It's okay. We adjust for that later. So that's not a super vital dimension, but the dimension in the instructions seems to work. Then we set the base stop. So that's for the base of the router. There's a stop back here that lets the router only penetrate into the front and back piece up until the base of the router hits that stop. So what I've done is I set that short so that when I make this pass, I'll be able to measure how much deeper I need to go. So I'm going to start with a scrap piece to be able to cut that depth, and then I can assemble it and say, how much deeper do I need to go? Because even if you can measure all this, which I've done, but in the end, it still is, it really depends upon how the cutter interfaces with it matters. The position of this comb really matters, and how much interference you're able to press into that wood. So hardness of the wood matters. So we're going to set that base stop a little bit short, and then we're going to figure out the cutter depth. Now the cutter depth in the instructions says I think 25-30 seconds, which I tried that just for the first cut out of this, and that's why I had to do this, because it was so far off. There's no way this is going to work. The deeper this cutter goes into the part, the smaller the opening at the top is, but the bottom always stays the same because it's a 1/2-inch cutter. You have a 7/16 bushing, so when you go from one side of the fixture to the other, that 1/2-inch wide pocket and gap goes to 9/16. Doesn't matter how deep the cutter is, at the bottom of that pocket, it's always going to be that 9/16, give or take, based on what's the actual dimension of the bushing, what's the actual dimension of the cutter, and those are all plus or minus 5 or 10 thousandths of an inch. But in the end, if you use the dimensional numbers, you get close enough, and then you can adjust it in. So we're going to set the cutter depth, and so part of that is figuring out how deep the cutter needs to go. So it's a 14-degree cutter. Why 14 degrees? Well, interestingly and conveniently, if you look at a 14-degree angle, the tangent of that angle, which is the ratio of the opposite leg to the adjacent leg, happens to be 0.249, almost exactly a quarter of an inch, or 0.25, let's say. So that says that the ratio of this far end to the height, to the depth, is 1 to 4. So that's convenient, because now depending upon how deep I go, I can estimate and come close to the top opening by this 4-to-1 ratio. So if I want for this overhang to be 1/16 at the top to be able to fit this tooth into that groove, I need to be 4/16 deep, right? So in order for that to be that width. And that comes really close. So after making a cut at 4/16, I was able to measure the width of the cut and the width of the tooth and determine that I needed to go another 1/64 of an inch bigger on each side of that tooth. So by going 1/16 in, 1/4 of a 16th on that width. So that's how that ratio works. That's the only reason I can figure 14 degrees became a standard, because it's easy to remember that 4-to-1 ratio. Okay, so we're going to set the cutter depth, and like I said, I started at 4/16 and I ended up at 5/16 and found that makes a nice tight joint. And some of that is just by tolerances of these parts. This comb isn't exactly, it's a 1/2 inch pitch, exactly. In other words, center of tooth to center of tooth is exactly 1/2 inch. But the way these are manufactured, I think they're water jet cut, most likely. And so there's a kerf in that cut, and that's less accurate than the pitch. The pitch is controlled by the CNC machine that's making the part. The thickness of the cut, or the width of the cut, is less precise. So it turns out that this should be a 1/2 inch tooth and a 1/2 inch gap, and they're not exactly that. So that's one of the tolerances that is going to vary fixture to fixture. And so there is no way to say this is the number, use these numbers, because it depends on the specific dimensions of your fixture, your guide bushing, that matters too. This isn't exactly 7/16. I can't remember what the number is. I had them all written down and decided later it doesn't matter, because there are other dimensions. For example, how well centered is that bushing in my router? It's not perfect. Turns out it doesn't matter, but you don't want to rotate the router. You want to keep it in one position and drive through the pattern without rotating it, because that rotation can move the center of the cutter with respect to the guide bushing. Okay, cutter depth, we got that. Once you have that, you make this cut, and then you can measure the depth of the cut and the height of this tooth. And you can find that what you want to do is set that depth, or the thickness of this tooth, measure that, and then set the depth to that number. And actually, like I said, I wanted to get that just a little bit proud of the surface, so I'm going to set it back just a little bit more. So I have a 6-inch diameter router base plate. So from that edge, that router base, the center line of the cutter is going to be 3 inches from that plate. But I want that to be, to get my 3/8 of an inch from out here, I need this to be 3 1/8. That comes from, I have a 1/4 inch here plus another inch, right? Because this is a 1/2 inch cutter. That gets me 3/8 of an inch back to this corner. And I actually found that I want to be at about 3 3/16. That puts, when this thing assembles, it puts the side rails just inboard of the outside edges of the front and back pieces. Okay, so we're gonna find the dimension for that base stop. So that's that, again, that fence in the back that only allows the cutter to go so deep. And then start cutting pieces. All right, so let's go back over to the fixture and I'll walk through this and then we'll cut some parts. Okay, so we're back at the fixture and I've prepared all my wood. These are the front and back and the sides. These have been cut to length. I used a radial arm saw so that I had enough room on the table to put a stop in. It helps to use stops rather than measure and cut, just so that all the boards are the same length with each other. The sides and fronts aren't the same length, and that's okay, but the length is the same side and the front and back are the same length, sorry. So let's start by setting up the wood clamps. Set these in here. Raise this short plate, get them in there all the way. And you want the wood directly underneath these cams. Okay, and they're loose now. So I'm gonna put this cam in the tight position and I'm gonna hand tighten these knobs just so they're both similarly snug. Then I'm gonna release it and I'm gonna give a half a turn to each knob. Clamp it. Yeah, that feels good. So those are good and secure. Now we're gonna set the front clamp for the two sides. So hand tight, just snug, and then half a turn, half a turn. Oh, I'm gonna loosen this. I think we're gonna have to go a little bit more than that. Yeah, let's go another quarter turn, quarter turn, quarter turn. Yeah, that feels good. Nice and snug. Nothing's gonna move. Okay. So let's put these in. I'm gonna put these boards together and hard up against this fork plate. I gotta make sure the front and back are away enough that I can fit these in. I'm gonna release these, push them together up against the fork plate, and I'm gonna center this on the pin and I'll show you why. And your situation might be different, but in my case, I wanna have at the top of the drawers, the tops of both sides and the front and back, the top of the drawer is gonna be to the outside up against these stops, and that's what we're gonna set next. And I'm gonna do that so that when we're done, the tops are at the same level. I don't want to have a step at the top of the drawer. The bottom of the drawer doesn't matter as much, and in my case I'm sort of lucky that the sides and front happen to be the same width, so it doesn't really matter as much, but still I want to make sure that these tops are level or even. And then I also want to have at the top of the drawer, I want to have a full peg on the top of the side. So at the bottom I have this half peg. I'm not worried about that so much because it's the bottom of the drawer. It's not as appealing looking at the bottom of the drawer. The top we want to have nice and clean. So make sure there's a full peg and enough material on the side so that it's not going to tear out or crack or anything. So a nice half peg on the front and back, and then a full peg at the top of the sides. So that's my goal. So to do that, I have the top edge of the board is about in the center of one of these slots. That's going to get cut, and it's going to make a full peg around this tooth. So positionally, that looks good. So I've set this so that both boards are hard up against that comb. I'm going to loosen these two side stops, and those are going to get pushed hard up against that wood. Okay, tighten them up there. Again, you don't want to over tighten anything because you get into trouble later with bad, I mean, they're not the highest quality fasteners, let's put it that way. Okay, so now we're going to set the front and back. So loosen this up, and we're going to put those, again, we want these tops to be as close as we can to the same altitude. So in the end, those two edges are going to be right in at the same place. So I'm checking to see if these boards need to come apart at all, and they do. It seems the front and back are just a little bit narrower than my sides, so this is going to work nicely. Okay, so I've got these two edges in the same place. I'm going to tighten this, and then I've got a little gap here, and that's okay. But what I do want to do is tape measure. I want to check and make sure that these boards are parallel. So I've got down this way, I've got 7 1/16 inch, and here I've got 7 1/16. So maybe just a little bit less. Yeah, 7 1/16. My ends are at the same place. I can just check and make sure everything looks good there. Yep, I like the look of that. Okay, so I'm not going to cut yet. I still need to set these stops, and in order to make this first full tooth fit into a full pocket on this board, I need these front and back to be out 1/2 inch. So the way we do that is I use, these are machinist parallels. People use drill bits or other things to set that 1/2 inch. I find these work really well. These come in a kit, but something like that. These are 1/8 inch thick, and they come in widths that are, well, you can also get different thicknesses. They come in pairs, and they're in 1/8 inch increments in height. So I'm using the 1/2 inch. This is 5/8, 3/4, etc. These are like $30 for a kit like that from Amazon. And I use these for everything, saw setups, all kinds of things. So I'm gonna place these 1/2 inch spacers, one on each side, and I'm gonna loosen these side clamps, and I'm gonna push these up against those. Make sure they're up against the wood. So this is going to make sure, this is going to set these spacers exactly 1/2 inch away from the wood. And then I'm going to tighten the clamps. And then when I release these, I can slide out those parallels, and then I can move the wood out to that spacer on both sides. Still want to be up against this front face, or the sides rather. Okay, let's see how that looks. I like to check and make sure I've got everything right. Again, check these are parallel, 8 and 1/16, 8 and 1/16, just what it should be. And so now I've got the first step done, which was with my whiteboard, wood clamps, wood fences I called them. These are these stops. Okay, we got those set. The comb stick out. So now with everything tight, we're going to check the distance from this comb end to the end of the wood. And I use a little metal ruler, works well. And it's got graduations to 30 seconds or even 64ths. And this is now set at right at 5/30 seconds. You want to check both ends, make sure it's not crooked. It's still set for 5/30 seconds. That's set by these knobs here. So if you loosen these, push this back both sides, it's wiggly, so I'm not going to do it here on camera, but I'm sitting right at 5/30 seconds. Not sure if that's what I said before, but that's measuring from the end of the wood to the end of this radius, and I'm doing that at both sides, sort of all the way down, make sure nothing's bent or wonky. Okay, so comb stick out, done. This is the base stop. So when I can demonstrate down here where there's no, let's see, I'm unplugged. Yes, I am unplugged. So you can see if I go down where there's no wood, that base of the router, which is 6 inches in diameter, hits that back fence. But I've got this, I've already made a test cut and set this back to where, so when the first cut was made, this part would stick out a little bit, something like that. Then I can measure with calipers or my little ruler and say, how much deeper does that need to go? Let's go ahead and reset that. What did I say? We're at 3 and 5/30 seconds. So let's go to the full 3/16. And so that should bring me, and of course you move one side and it moves the other side because, you know, I'm not measuring right where the knob is. And I'm also looking straight down on the wood so I don't get fooled by, called parallax. Okay. 3/16. 3/16. Okay. So let's make our cuts. Hearing protection. Eye protection. Let's go. One thing I didn't mention. When the router comes out of this slot, it's going to want to tear this. It's going to want to tear out this end, and I don't want tear out. So it helps to run a quick pass across here, and you can do it sort of roughly by hand. But I like to just put a little spacer. I happen to have about a 3/4 inch, a little more. gap between this fence and the comb plate, which just fits a piece of 3/4 inch wood. So I'm going to use that and just make a pass across the front, remove the spacer, and then go make my dovetails. Iron protection, iron protection. Tear out. Not as bad as it would have been. Okay, here goes. Try this again. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Ooh, definitely tight. There, we have dovetails. So I see I have a little bit of a gap there. That means my comb plate wasn't all the way down flat. So I'll have to tighten that up on the other side. But you see I have just a little bit under that surface, which is right where I want to be. And these top surfaces are just at the same altitude. Don't know if you can see that. So far so good. So now when I flip these around, because I want this to be the top, if I turn it around, this top is in the wrong place. It has to go on the other side of the fixture. And this one does the same thing. I want the tops, this is the top. I want that to be on the same side of the fixture. I want the cuts to be up. Put that one in. That one in. We can't really clamp this up. We're just going to keep them clear for now. Clamp them in. The bottoms, same thing. We have to rotate them, and then for the tops to be at the tops, we have to trade places. Is that right? Oh, and the arcs need to be out. So that makes this first peg, full peg at the top. The cut feature is still to the outside because we're going to make the same shape part over here. And that's going to go there. And this one, rounded side out, full peg to the outside. These should go right together. I'm going to push those up against that comb plate and clamp them in place. And then we're going to release these. I'm going to push those out against the stops and against my side pieces. We'll check that width again. 8 1/16. Oh, 8 inches. That means they're not quite square. Let's try that again. Eight and 1/16. 8 and 1/16. Perfect. Okay, let's make sure the tops of these boards need to be right at the same place. So the cutter goes to the same depth and the comb needs to be flat on both. That appears to be true. So I'll put our spacer back in. Hearing protection, eye protection, here we go. Okay, we should have a box. There, just like that. And these two we cut before. No. These two we cut before. We have a dovetail box. Okay, thanks for watching. Hope that helps you. If you like this content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and give me a like. All right, have a good day.